Okay, it looks like people are in the stream now, so I guess I can go ahead and get started. Normally, for these kind of post-game analysis, I'm just doing it from the Suns' perspective, so I'm just going through the Suns. But I'm going to do my absolute best to touch on both sides. As a neutral fan of this game, obviously, we can start with the Celtics. I thought the Celtics offense was incredibly impressive tonight. The ball movement that I am seeing out of the Celtics, especially on penetrations, is something that we didn't consistently see last year. And I do think that if they can continue just that off-ball motion and off-ball movement, they are going to be an absolutely legitimate threat. Obviously, Jayson Tatum looked like a absolute superstar tonight. He was hitting some absolutely tough shots. He was creating within the flow of the offense, which I absolutely love to see. Just as a fan of good basketball, Pritchard was fantastic. His poise was elite for a late first-round rookie. He was attacking well. His speed is, I want to say, sneaky. Obviously, it's the sneaky athleticism for the Y guy always. But he really does have a very good ability to get into the paint, as well as see the floor off of his drives. Jaylen Brown was also incredibly impressive, and I will touch on Grant Williams more as well. For the Raptors, the first point that obviously comes to mind is Fred VanVleet is a goddamn fucking baller, especially for such a short guard. He was incredibly impressive tonight. Everybody who watches or has ever watched the Raptors knows the absolute threat he is from outside. But I think the penetration that he provided to the Toronto offense was incredibly important, especially in moments where the Toronto offense was stalling. The Toronto offense, one of the biggest differences that I've seen this year versus last year is that Toronto off-ball movement has significantly stalled at points throughout just about every single game this year. I don't know if that's just because of the new additions of Baines and Lin, while losing Ibaka and Gasol, two guys who worked well within motion offenses. But there are definitely times with the 4-out offense where the Raptors kind of watch penetrations. They just stand there, they get to their spots, they cut immediately to their spots that they're supposed to be out on the three-point line, and they just stand there during penetrations. And that doesn't always happen. I think they did a better job at that, especially early in the third quarter. But there were absolutely moments, several moments, especially on a handful of Siakam drives. I would really like to see the Toronto Raptors, challenge Siakam's passing ability a lot more. I think that they fully utilize his capability to back down smaller players. Many times, especially even in this game, you see it where Siakam catches it at 18 feet, begins to slowly back down the player, and while he's backing down the player, there's a lot of motion on the perimeter, and it often leads to a pretty good three-point look. And I just would like to see that kind of ball movement more often on forward-facing drives, where he's not back to the basket, slowly backing down a player, but where he's actively driving, doing that little Euro step, the quick cuts that he does, and even the spin move. Get the off-ball motion really working. I think that during those drives, I think that's harder for Siakam, but I do think he has a certain playmaking ability that could really help with the offense. Lowry looked very good tonight. Siakam continues to be a little bit... Thank you for the follow, I greatly appreciate that. Siakam continues to be a little bit of an enigma. He got really hot early on. He knocked those back-to-back threes down to start the game. However, he had a little bit of a cold stretch late in the first quarter, early in the second quarter. And when he's going through those cold stretches, I feel like he kind of forces drives sometimes, where the help is there. That was when, at a certain point, the Celtics had subbed off Tristan Thompson and Tice and had Robert Williams in at center. And the Celtics were doing a fantastic job at help defense at that point. And Siakam just kind of continued to drive into two bodies and he forced a few shots. There's one play that specifically comes to mind early in the second quarter where he spun, and I want to say Jaylen Brown stepped up, and both Robert Williams and Jaylen Brown contested the shot, and Siakam just short-armed it. And in those situations, I would like to see some kind of backdoor cutting or flare screens or any kind of ball movement so that Siakam has that bailout opportunity rather than just kicking it to the dude standing on the wing. With that being said, I think the two players from both teams, one player from each team, that impressed me without necessarily the box score contributions. I was really, really impressed with Boucher. I think that he is incredibly important to the Raptors ball movement. Thank you, follow. I greatly appreciate that. But he is somebody who is incredibly active while he is off ball. I mean, we saw that consistently throughout the game. We've seen that in other games this year. He is somebody that is not standing still at pretty much any point during the offense, and I think that consistently creates looks for other guys, as well as the occasional nice little backdoor to him, which he does a solid job of finishing. And then for the Celtics, it is Grant Williams. I know that he did not play last game, and I was incredibly impressed, not only with his defense. I thought his defense really adds a lot of defensive versatility to the Celtics. I think that the switchability of the Celtics while Grant Williams is on the floor is incredibly impressive and will go a long ways for teams that run that kind of four wing or two guard, two wing rather than two post player lineups. I think that the Celtics are going to be hard to beat in those matchups, especially when Grant Williams plays the way he did tonight. Real Clay Thompson, thank you for follow. I greatly appreciate that. Grant Williams not only impressed me with his defensive versatility tonight, but I just love the way that he attacks the boards. I mean, it is really impressive, his tenacity. He's a fantastic at boxing out, or he is fantastic at boxing out. And, I mean, he's a high-level finisher around the rim. I mean, the play that immediately sticks out to me for both of those two things was that offensive rebound and putback, I want to say, in the fourth quarter. I mean, he's just a strong as hell dude. And I think he's a fantastic asset for the Celtics, especially a Celtics team that might struggle against some of the bigger forward teams. I think he does a very solid job against matching up against maybe like a Siakam, or you could even throw him against a Kawhi, like just physical, contact players. I think Grant Williams can do enough of a job for several minute periods that it's definitely not going to hurt you. I also really want to just continue to brag on Pritchard tonight. I've seen him in a handful of possessions. I can't say that. I've seen 3 Celtics games this year, but I can't say that I've just been keyed in, especially whenever Pritchard is getting heavy minutes. But tonight, holy fuck, I am completely sold on him. He might be the steal of the draft next to Tyrese Halliburton. He is an absolute stud. To have that kind of poise and be under control like that is not something that you consistently see out of rookie guards. His first step is incredibly fast, which really continues to open up the Celtics offense off of his penetration. He has a very nice looking shot. His off-ball movement is fantastic. And although I don't necessarily think he's going to be an elite passer, his passing vision is incredibly impressive. He sees the floor incredibly well, especially off of the drive, which we saw 7 or 8 times tonight. Even on plays that didn't necessarily convert into assists for him, I think that he pairs excellently next to a Jaylen Brown. And I can't wait to see what he does for the rest of his rookie year. I think that after this stream, I might have to go put some money on a Pritchard for first team all rookie bet. I was incredibly impressed. Kind of off of that same vein, I thought that Jaylen Brown did a very, very good job tonight, especially within the role that the offense needed him to play in, with Tatum just going fucking nuclear at points in the game. Jaylen Brown, I think, is maybe a top 3 secondary playmaker in the NBA. I think he's somebody who, if you're driving and kicking out, if you want a secondary drive off that kick out, off of the closeout, it doesn't get much better than Jaylen Brown. The dude's a freak athlete. His court vision is really solid, and I am just so impressed with the improvements to his ball control over the last 2 years. That was definitely a point of emphasis within his rookie year, and he's really, really focused on that, and I think that's incredibly impressive to see. He's somebody who really just adds multiple dimensions to the Celtics offense, and I said this in my main takeaways on the Celtics sub, but he is somebody who I don't know if I saw more than 1 or 2 possessions the entire time that Jaylen Brown was on the floor and touched the ball that the Celtics off-ball movement did not look fantastic. He works incredibly well within the motion offense, but not only that, but he generates motion within the offense at a really, really high level, and I think that is something that is incredibly important so many times with those kind of attacking wings, and even guys like Brandon Ingram's, although they are good at attacking the basket, they can oftentimes be ball stoppers and kind of kill a motion's offense, or offense's motion. And I think Jaylen Brown is the exact opposite, and that really, really showed tonight. I really, really liked what I saw out of Ojeleye. I think that's something he needs to continue to add to his game to really, just take the next step, is, attacking the basket. I think that so many times these kind of 3-and-D guys allow defenses to game plan for them because they know they aren't a threat off the drive on the closeouts. And Ojeleye absolutely has fallen into that category in the past. However, tonight he did a fantastic job driving to the basket off of the closeouts, which, like I've mentioned before, just continued to open up the Celtics offense, and even a couple of times allowed Jayson Tatum to get even easier buckets. And obviously, I really, really want to touch on Jayson Tatum before I go back over to the Raptors side. Jayson Tatum, he is a guy that most people would consider borderline superstar, and I definitely would have him in that category as well. And tonight he played every single bit of a superstar role. He was getting great looks within the offense, within the motion offense, but there were several instances where the ball movement did break down, or he just went ahead and isolated, and he was able to get tough shots off and knock them down. There was that one fadeaway over Siakam whenever Siakam had some great defense. I want to say late in the third quarter, might have been early in the fourth quarter. That is just like, holy fuck, dude. Like, what do you do in that situation? I mean, Siakam played that incredibly, incredibly well, and Jayson Tatum is just a fucking bucket, and he could not miss tonight. And for all of the Raptors fans on this stream, I feel bad for you, and I sure as fuck hope that he is not hitting those kinds of shots whenever the Suns come into town later in the season. That would be the Celtics are going to be incredibly, incredibly tough to beat whenever Tatum is just knocking down shots like this. I love that he was able to put up 40 points tonight, almost matching Jaylen Brown's 42 from a couple of nights ago. Loved your breakdown on the Raps post-game thread. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate that. I definitely tried to do my best analyzing the game from both teams' perspectives. But yeah, no, Tatum, I think one of the most impressive things with Tatum this season has not only been his ability to generate looks within the offense that Brad Stevens is trying to implement or has implemented, but his low turnovers. I mean, he's contributing to the ball movement. He's contributing to open shots, but at the end of the day, he's doing it without turning the ball over. He had one turnover today, and I think that is incredibly, incredibly impressive. Now back to the Raptors. One of the things that immediately sticks out for the Raptors is that the big men are going to be a legitimate problem. I don't think that's a problem that's going to go away anytime soon, and I think that Nick Nurse is going to have to adjust. I think that he is maybe, he's definitely a top 3 coach in the NBA, so I do think he absolutely will adjust, but we haven't seen that adjustment yet, and I think that the big men hurting the Raptors was apparent in several ways, the first being rebounding. I mean, at the end of the day, the Raptors got absolutely killed on the boards tonight. I think the disparity closed late in the fourth, or halfway through the fourth quarter. But at the end of the day, when it was a blowout, not a blowout, but when it was a 20, 25-point game, y'all were getting out rebounded by like 20 at that point, like 18 or 20 at that point. And as a Suns fan, I saw this a lot with Baines tonight, and we saw it while he was on the Suns. But he is somebody who's incredibly important on the boards, but he is not somebody that's necessarily going to get the boards himself. He's somebody who will always put a body on somebody. He is never not going to box somebody out, which is incredibly, incredibly important. However, Baines is not exactly the most agile guy in the entire world, so he's not somebody who's going to box out and then when the shot is coming off the rim, be able to go and get it. Rather, where his strengths come on the boards is putting a body on somebody and allowing his teammates to clean up the rebounds. That is really where his strength is on the boards, and the Raptors just didn't rebound. The forwards of the Raptors did not do a good job of rebounding nor putting a body on somebody, especially in the first half, which I think really, really negatively affected them, especially on the defensive end. I really need to see Siakam attacking the boards more. I mean, he has all of the rebounding capabilities in the world. He's incredibly lengthy, incredibly athletic, and has the aggression necessary to attack the boards. But tonight, we did not see that at all, and I think that was incredibly disappointing, and I absolutely think it was one of the reasons the Celtics were able to go on such a substantial run, especially in the second quarter. And I also think that we need to see more of that out of OG. I mean, I think in the same vein, he's somebody who's incredibly athletic, very strong guy. And if he puts a body on somebody, then he absolutely could be averaging 5 or 6 rebounds a game. And tonight, he had 0 rebounds, which is horrible for him, especially with a Baines type of center. I mean, at the end of the first half, Fred VanVleet was y'all's leading rebounder, and it's because he was attacking the glass while Baines was boxing out. And while that's fine, if you're relying on a 6-foot guard to do that aggressive rebounding off of Baines' box outs, you're going to get killed on the glass a lot of the nights. And I think this is something that is easily correctable, but definitely needs to be a point of contention for Nick Nurse. And I need to see Siakam, especially in the paint more, getting more rebounds. I think that this is also reflective on the offensive end, where so many times the Raptors are ending offensive possessions with Siakam 18 plus feet away from the basket. And I hate that. I really, really hate that. I understand that he's important in your transition defense, but when you're getting killed on the glass like this tonight, especially against a team that's not very big in the Celtics, I do want to see when the shot goes up, Siakam attack the basket and try to get those offensive rebounds. I think he could absolutely average 3 a game. Barcode, thank you for the follow. I greatly appreciate that. I absolutely think Siakam is somebody who could average 3+ offensive rebounds a game, and I mean that's the difference that is a significant difference, especially when a team is going on a run like the Celtics did in the first half. More on the Raptors, like I mentioned, I was incredibly impressed with Fred VanVleet. Lowry played his game tonight. I think Anunoby did a solid job. I really like to see him attacking the basket. However, I would like to see him be more of a creator off of his drives. I think oftentimes he attacks the basket with the sole purpose of trying to finish a play rather than creating more motion for the Raptors offense. And I just think that's somewhere, or that's a place where his game could definitely grow, especially if the Raptors want to rebound this rough start to the season. And I do think the Raptors will rebound. I think that there's too much talent on this team for them not to rebound based off or rebound back from this rough start. Like I said, I was incredibly impressed with Boucher. I think he absolutely needs more minutes. I think that he was incredibly important on the rebounding end for the Raptors, as well as just the motion, which I mentioned. I think that he is somebody who is incredibly versatile. I'd like to see him matching up against a Grant Williams, and I definitely want to see him getting more minutes. However, I definitely understand that it can be tough with Siakam getting the minutes that he does. However, obviously, the Baines-Alex Len situation needs to be remedied. And there are a lot of teams, especially when they go into their backups, will not be running a traditional center. So I definitely think there's opportunity there. But I definitely think that's an area for the Raptors to adjust. I thought it was really interesting that after a really rough first half, the Raptors just essentially went away from Baines. Alex Len got some minutes. Boucher did get some minutes at center. I just think that you do not want to. Thank you for the bits. I greatly appreciate that. But I think that if you are relying on Alex Len for more than 8 minutes a game. He only got 8 minutes tonight, but the Raptors are going to be in some serious trouble. I have never been a fan of Alex Len. I think that he's incredibly unimpressive. However, he could be a useful tool to the Raptors on the rebounding end, which I definitely think is an area, obviously, they need to concentrate on. As well, I am continually disappointed in Norman Powell this season. I'm not quite sure what's going on, but so often last season, he was the primary penetrator for the offense with that second group. And we're just really not seeing it tonight. Or we didn't really see it at all tonight, and we're really not seeing it this season. I don't know what's necessarily going on with him. I don't know if his confidence is decreasing just because the shots aren't going in. But I definitely think that Norman Powell will have a bounce back game eventually. I mean, I think that he is playing much below his level, and with him playing the way he is right now, it is definitely going to be harder for the Raptors to win games because in those moments where the Raptors offense stalls, you need guys to go get buckets. And last season, Norman Powell could go get a bucket, and this season he hasn't been able to fulfill on that end. I'm not saying I don't think he will be able to. I absolutely still think he has that capability. However, we haven't really seen it this season. So I definitely, obviously, want to see more out of Norman Powell. I think he is a much better player than he is playing like right now. Alex Len and useful should never seriously be said in the same sentence. I mean, I don't want to hate on the man too much, but I think that he is the most. He's a 2K generated player for centers. He's somebody who can rebound well. He can contest shots okay off of drives, but pretty much anything else. I mean, he's fine at finishing if it's spoon fed for him. Although he is maybe the worst hands for any center in the NBA. However, that's pretty much all he does, and that was me trying to be nice to him. He was pretty hot from 3 2 games ago. I've seen he's been working on his 3 a lot recently. I think that, like I said, I just as a Suns fan, as somebody who watched a dozen plus Hawks games last year, Alex Len is not somebody the Toronto Raptors want to rely on. And if you find yourself relying on him, good luck. That's all I can really say on that end. Grant Williams was playing like an actual power forward, which was nice to see. He really was. He really filled in the traditional power forward role incredibly well tonight. Like I said, I really appreciate his defensive versatility and what he brings to the Celtics, not only with the ability to switch, but his quick feet when it comes to early rotations, as well as helping off of his man, but being able to recover at a quick rate. I think that he's a very underrated defender, and I think that this was one of the best defensive games I have seen out of Grant Williams, although I have also seen quite a few other good defensive games out of Grant Williams. I really liked what I saw out of Robert Williams as well. I think that I've kind of touched on this already, but I was not a big fan at all of whenever the Celtics were running a too big lineup. I think that that really hurt their defense. I think that whenever it came to rotating or helping off of the penetration, or helping onto the penetration, I guess I should say, helping off of your player, the Raptors were really killing them early on. I don't like Tristan Thompson's mobility, especially whenever he's having to rotate quickly on the perimeter. I think that led to a lot of very easy open shots for the Toronto Raptors early on, which they hit, which is why they were able to produce such a substantial lead early in the first quarter. However, once that rotation stopped and Robert Williams came into the game at center, the defensive versatility of the Celtics looked fantastic. And I think when those lineups are in for the Celtics are when they're going to be tough to beat, especially if you're playing like a team like the Toronto Raptors, who like to play a 4-out motion offense. I think that whenever you play a team maybe like the Pelicans or the Jazz immediately come to mind, where they like to play two big men, a Derek Favors and a Rudy Gobert, or Zion Williamson and Steven Adams. I think that two big lineup is absolutely okay with Tice and Tristan Thompson. However, I think whenever you're playing teams even like the Phoenix Suns, who run Jay Crowder and Cam Johnson at power forward, I think that it is going to be a tough matchup to run both Tristan Thompson and Daniel Tice. The Suns are just the first lineup that came to mind. There are 15 other NBA teams who run heavy wing player power forward minutes, and I don't like the matchup for the Celtics in those games. I really hope in those games that Robert Williams gets heavy minutes. I do not mind the Daniel Tice and Grant Williams lineups, even though that is technically a too big lineup. I think that Grant Williams, like I've mentioned, has that defensive versatility where he's able to guard the 4-out, and so I'm perfectly fine with those lineups. However, it's the Tristan Thompson, Daniel Tice lineups that I am not in love with, and I think the Raptors really penalized early in this game. I still like what Tristan Thompson brings to the Celtics. Obviously, he was essentially non-existent outside of the glass tonight for the Celtics. Had a few good defensive plays, but I wouldn't mind seeing some Tristan Thompson and Grant Williams lineup. Grant, just some more minutes. I think that those lineups could especially be effective. I think Tristan Thompson showed on the Cavs his ability to play center minutes, even though he might not necessarily be a guy that you want to start at center. And I think Daniel Tice is perfectly fine in that regards. I think he is maybe not necessarily the most versatile defender, but I think he's a very solid defender, especially when it comes to penetration from wings. Grant Williams was playing like an actual power forward, which was nice to see. Two big lineup was good when we have Horford. I don't think Tice has the speed, athleticism that he had. And you also have to remember that Al Horford, especially when he was on the Celtics, it was really the end of this. But he was still an absolutely elite defender, had an argument for second-team all-defense. I think that Al Horford, although might not have the mobility of a traditionally good perimeter big defender, He is somebody who moves his feet incredibly well, had incredibly active hands. So if he got into the situation where he did have to guard a Siakam out on the perimeter, you were fine with it. There was no problem there. In fact, oftentimes that was a good matchup. Whether it was Siakam or Kawhi or Giannis, he is somebody who could engage in those perimeter matchups, whereas Tristan Thompson and Daniel Tice are not. So, in that same vein, I definitely think it'll be interesting to see the rotations. I wouldn't mind potentially seeing a Robert Williams and Tristan Thompson lineup. I do think Robert Williams moves his feet very well. Obviously, incredibly athletic dude. However, I wouldn't say I'm incredibly optimistic about the potential of that kind of lineup. I think Grant Williams definitely needs to be that versatile power forward for the Celtics, and I absolutely will be shocked if at the end of the season the Grant Williams at power forward lineups are not the best net rating lineups for the Celtics, maybe alongside the Robert Williams at center, and then Jaylen Brown gets a couple minutes at power forward, which I'm especially fine with whenever teams run those 4 perimeter players. More on this, I was really underwhelmed by Tremont Waters. I think that he is somebody who I would like to see Pritchard get his minutes whenever Marcus Smart is back. I think Marcus Smart deserves every single minute he gets. I think Marcus Smart probably deserves more minutes than he gets. He's incredibly important within the motion offense of the Celtics. I think he generates great looks, and obviously he is one of the best perimeter defenders in the entire NBA. And so I would like to see Pritchard get some of that Waters backup minutes, especially with what we saw out of Pritchard tonight. Both creating for himself and creating for others and operating within the offense, but extenuating the effects of that offense. It is going to be really interesting to see how Pritchard fits within the offense once Kemba comes back, as well as Marcus Smart is playing. I definitely think that one of the things that could limit his rookie year is just playing time, because this is obviously an incredibly stacked team that is incredibly deep, especially at the shooting guard position. So I definitely there are a lot of players that you could play at shooting guard, even if they aren't necessarily traditionally shooting guards. I guess I should have rephrased that. And with Jeff Teague as well, I definitely saw him play solidly in a few games this year. I think that he was an incredibly underrated pickup. I think he's somebody who, although may have lost a step, I think that he was always an underrated guy who maybe was given too much of a leash on his shot creation in Minnesota, so that only led to him being even more underrated. However, I loved him on the Hawks. I think he was fantastic at generating offense for them while not being a selfish player, and I absolutely see him recapturing that role on the Celtics in less minutes due to his age. I am very interested to see what Pritchard looks like with Kemba and Teague and Smart back. I think that he's somebody who can operate off ball. I think there were many instances tonight where we saw him be effective off of the catch and shoot or the catch and drive. So I wouldn't mind seeing him getting that second guard, some of those second guard minutes, especially next to Marcus Smart, who obviously, like I've mentioned, is one of the absolute best perimeter defenders in the entire NBA. However, I think next to Kemba, it could definitely be a curious matchup. I don't know how well those two will match up, especially with just the driving potential of Kemba. I think that he's somebody who, although the ball doesn't stick with him in the motion offense, he is somebody who takes up a decent amount of the dribbles per possession, and I think that's where Pritchard showed that he was effective tonight. So it'll be interesting to see how Pritchard looks when Kemba comes back, but I am very excited to see him get some minutes next to Marcus Smart before Kemba comes back. And then past that, I definitely took some notes on the game tonight. I do this for the Suns game where I just take note of a handful of possessions that I think really encapsulate a lot of my overviews on the game. So I'll definitely go through some of those here in a second. I just want to make sure that I've touched on everything that I necessarily want to touch on. Again, Fred VanVleet was a fucking flamethrower tonight. The fact that he was -9 and Lowry was -5, it was really impressive, especially considering the fact that the bench came back, and when those guys went out, y'all were down 20 at that point. I think that Fred VanVleet is incredibly important, and the fact that he tied Siakam for the most rebounds this game is not a good thing. I think that if you're a Raptors fan, obviously that's an impressive thing for Fred VanVleet. I think that's incredibly... It was necessary tonight. They absolutely needed every single rebound they got out of him. However, if you are relying on Fred VanVleet to get 5 rebounds a game or 7 rebounds a game, it's going to be a long season. However, I think Nick Nurse is too good of a coach to fall to that trap. One thing with Aaron Baines that I definitely want to touch on before I just kind of end this post-game analysis is I think that one of the things with Baines that I mentioned is that he boxes out, but he's not necessarily a rebounder, and he's somebody who is slow. He's not somebody who you can operate on a heavy rotation defense. He's somebody who you need a 4-man rotation and the occasional help off from Baines, but if you expect Baines to be a primary early rotator, y'all are going to get killed on defense, and I think that you absolutely have to account the fact that Baines is a slow-footed center when it comes to those rotations, and he helps on penetration. He is a solid contester of penetration. However, if you are relying on him to be the Marc Gasol, step up early into the penetration and solely contest it, you are in a bad situation. And for Baines to be truly, truly effective, I think you need to get him more involved on screenplays. I understand that the Raptors run a 4-out motion offense. I understand that so much of the ball movement and shot generation is created off of penetration, but goddamn, that is what Aaron Baines does. Use it. Like, that is his skill, is creating open looks off of the screens. That is his best quality. He's a solid roll man, and he improved to a really, really surprising pick and pop player. He is somebody whose physicality can really, really be utilized to open up players, especially off of a ball handler getting open from the screen, getting into penetration, somebody stepping over to help on the penetration, and then kickouts. We saw that a shitload in the Suns last year, and we saw almost none of that tonight with Aaron Baines. And if you expect to run a 4-out motion offense with Aaron Baines standing in the post and just setting flare screens, then I think that Aaron Baines is going to be incredibly, incredibly disappointing for Toronto Raptors fans. I think that there are better ways to utilize his offensive skill set, which he absolutely does have, but you have to put him in the right situations for that utilization. And I think we saw that from the Suns last year, and I don't think we saw a single minute of it in this game tonight, which led Aaron Baines to be incredibly, incredibly effective and rightfully benched in the second half, because with the style of play, both offensively and defensively, we've seen those both cater towards Aaron Baines' weaknesses. I think that something needs to give. Either incorporate Aaron Baines' strengths into the offenses, or you're going to have to rely more heavily on Boucher center minutes, as well as Alex Len, who can operate within that four out motion offense, but it's not going to be effective. He's not going to contribute much. He's just not going to hurt you. So I think that the Raptors are in a precarious situation where the play style of Aaron Baines does not necessarily cater to the offensive play style where Fred VanVleet, Lowry, OG, and Siakam are most effective. However, something's got to give. And at the end of the day, the Raptors just don't have the big depth that they used to, so you're going to have to adjust at some point in time. With that being said, I felt like it was incredibly important to note that not only as somebody who was incredibly impressed with Aaron Baines' contribution to the Suns last year, but was really disappointed in what I saw out of him. And although I don't think he had a good game as an individualistic perspective, I do think that in large part it's because of poor utilization of his skills. Some of the things that I definitely wanted to touch on, one that I haven't mentioned yet, was I was not in love with the Tatum to Tristan Thompson connection, especially early on in the first quarter. There were two possessions out of three straight possessions, so 2 out of 3 possessions, where Tatum drove, Tristan Thompson was at the mid-range, and then Tristan Thompson started cutting, and Tatum tried to feed him. However, I don't know if Tatum fed him early or Tristan Thompson wasn't just prepared to catch it at that point, but it led to some pretty clumsy exchanges. I definitely want to see a progression of the chemistry between those two. But I mean, it's early on in the season. I absolutely think that we will see more chemistry. And once we see that kind of connection forming between Tatum and Tristan Thompson, once we see them get into rhythm together, I think that Tristan Thompson will be more effective within the Celtics offense. So much of this was just was talking about Tatum's effectiveness. I was really impressed by Anunoby getting into the lane easy, which was incredibly important for the offensive motion, which led to open threes early in the first quarter. Tice did a really, really solid job defending a few Siakam drives, which I thought was incredibly impressive. However, he's somebody who is good at helping on drives that are happening. However, if you throw him out on the perimeter, I'm not extremely confident in Tice in those situations. I know he's an underrated defender, but he's a much better help defender than he is a primary defender. So I definitely thought that was interesting. I thought the Raptors were doing a really, really good job at moving off ball while Siakam is isolating in the mid-range in the post. Like I said, with the back to the basket, I love the motion offense that I saw. I wish that they would continue that motion offense whenever Siakam is driving headfirst towards the basket. I was not impressed with Nesmith tonight. I'm not even entirely sure how to pronounce it. I was not impressed with his first quarter performance. NSHTS, thank you for the follow. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. I definitely plan on doing more of these post-game analysis as a neutral fan more. I think tonight was a lot of fun, and I absolutely will be doing this on just about every single Suns game. So if your team is ever playing the Suns, definitely come and check out the stream. Pritchard, I was really, really impressed with him attacking Siakam, and he had a high off-the-glass finish. I think that was incredibly impressive, especially seeing the confidence on the drive against such a long guy like Siakam. The Celtics went on a 15-4 run in the second, where Tatum was going nuts and Robert Williams was doing a fantastic job as the defensive center. I love the ball movement from Jayson Tatum. He was shooting lights out at that point. However, he wasn't necessarily letting the ball stick with him. He wasn't isolating more than just a handful of times this game, which I think is incredibly impressive. I think that we've often seen Jayson Tatum get hot and then turn into Kobe. And not to say that turning into Kobe is a bad thing, but in a motion offense, when you begin to isolate heavily, it can lead to a negative effect, especially on offense for your teammates. And tonight we didn't see that from Tatum, so I actually really, really like that. Both Jaylen Brown and OG were attacking at a high level. Talked about Boucher being huge for the motion on the Raptors offense at times. It really felt like he was the only one moving off ball, especially on penetrations. Siakam went cold there for a little bit, and I think when he went cold, he kind of stopped looking for his teammates and rather was just like, fuck, I need to get this ball to go in. And I definitely think that hurt the Raptors at the end of the second quarter. FEV had been the best player for the Raptors. In the third quarter, he was just absolutely torching it, lighting it up. And then Grant Williams really turned on the defense in the third quarter. I was incredibly impressed with that. And then in the fourth quarter, I noted that I was really impressed with the Celtics offense, especially when they had 4 active shooters on the floor at any given time. I think their motion offense, whenever they have all 4 shooters, and they have guys who can penetrate, like a Pritchard, like a Tatum, like a Brown, and even tonight, as I mentioned prior, an Ojale, who we saw attack tonight at least a handful of times. And so I was really impressed overall with what I saw out of the Celtics. I think we saw some fight out of the Raptors tonight that we haven't necessarily seen in some of these other games. However, the Raptors very obviously have a lot of things to clean up, whether it's rebounds, whether it's figuring out how to get Aaron Baines utilized within the offense, whether it's the motion offense, being consistent and not stalling at points. I definitely think there are a lot of points of emphasis, but again, I think the Raptors are an incredibly talented team. I think Nick Nurse is one of the best coaches in the NBA, and I absolutely have no doubt in my mind that they will figure this out and they will be a playoff team. I do think that this will be a long season, but I mean we're just a handful of games into the season, and teams really do not figure out their identity until 10 games into the season. That is a common moniker in the NBA that I absolutely believe in. I think too often the first 10 games has too much emphasis placed on them. However, with that being said, what we have seen out of the Raptor in these first handful of games has not been good, and there is definitely some things that need to change. But they have the talent to change it. Jayson Tatum looked like a superstar tonight. Fred VanVleet is a fucking animal and a human flamethrower, and I cannot wait to see what those two do for the rest of the season. I've been incredibly impressed with Jaylen Brown this season, and even though he took a backseat to Tatum tonight, I still think that he had an excellent game. With all of that being said, I do think I'm going to go ahead and hop off here. Thank you so much for checking out my post-game analysis. This was a shitload of fun to do as a neutral fan rather than just doing this for the Suns, where I'm obviously have my biases. So I really like doing this, and I absolutely plan on doing this for more fans in the future. So be looking out for me on Reddit, especially in your team's post-game threads. And I will see y'all later.